So, you know that feeling when you were just sitting on the couch, entirely comfortable, and you suddenly realize you need to, grab your phone charger from the bedroom?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Right, so you stand up with absolute purpose, you walk down the hall, you cross the threshold into the bedroom, and instantly, it is like someone just yanked the power cord out of your brain.
It is the absolute worst. Your mind just goes completely, utterly blank.
Exactly. You are just standing there, staring at the foot of the bed, doing a mental headstand, trying to figure out why on earth you walked into this room.
It is a universally maddening experience.
Yeah.
And usually, the immediate aftermath is this creeping wave of anxiety, right?
Totally.
You stand there for a few seconds and wonder, wait, is my memory starting to fail? Or, am I losing my edge?
Okay, let's unpack this right away. We're here to tell you that you are absolutely not losing it. Welcome to the deep dive.
Glad to be here.
Today, we are exploring a heavily documented cognitive phenomenon that psychologists call the doorway effect, or the location updating effect.
Right, which sounds very technical, but it's super common.
Exactly. This is not a random glitch in your afternoon. It is actually a highly evolved, deeply embedded feature of how the human brain processes reality.
Yeah, and our mission for this deep dive is really a three-part journey for you today.
Right.
First, we are going to unpack the actual science of why this happens. Second, we want to relieve that anxiety that this means your brain is aging or broken.
Because it definitely isn't.
Exactly.
Hmm.
And third, we are going to give you some actionable brain hacks to bypass it entirely. It fundamentally changes how you view your own daily interactions with the spaces around you.
And to do this, we are synthesizing some really groundbreaking cognitive psychology research today. We are pulling from the foundational work of Gabriel Radvansky at the University of Notre Dame,
Yes, his work is absolutely crucial here.
along with virtual reality studies from the University of Queensland and some vital neuroscience mapping from University College London.
Right? And all of these researchers are basically trying to answer one core question. How do environmental boundaries dictate what we remember?
So, to understand why you leave your keys in the kitchen and then forget you are looking for them the second your foot hits the hallway floor, we have to talk about how the brain actually records your life.
Because it is definitely not what we think.
Right. We tend to imagine our memory as this continuous, unedited video camera, like it's just rolling 24/7, capturing one long, seamless take from the moment we wake up to the moment we go to sleep.
And, I mean, if the human brain actually functioned that way, we would be in serious trouble almost immediately.
Really? Why is that?
Because recording continuous sensory input, meaning every single sight, sound, texture, temperature shift, and internal thought without interruption, it would cause a catastrophic cognitive overload.
Oh, wow, just too much data.
Exactly. The metabolic energy and the sheer computational power required to maintain a seamless, unedited video feed of your life would completely exhaust your brain's resources.
So it literally just cannot handle that much information at once.
Right. So instead of a continuous stream, the brain uses a much more efficient strategy. It is called event segmentation theory.
Event segmentation theory. Okay.
Essentially, your subconscious actively chops your continuous waking experience into discrete, manageable chapters. In cognitive psychology, we call these chapters event models.
That makes a lot of intuitive sense, actually, when you think about how we tell stories. Your day is structured more like scenes in a movie.
Yeah, exactly like that.
You have the making coffee chapter, followed by the driving to work chapter, and then the sitting at the desk chapter. But the brain has to have some kind of mechanism to decide where one chapter ends and the next one begins, right?
Precisely.
Yeah.
And that is where physical space becomes incredibly important. You see, your brain operates on a predictive processing system.
Okay.
It is constantly running background calculations, anticipating what is going to happen next based on your current environment.
Right.
So when you cross a threshold like moving from a cozy, carpeted living room into a brightly lit, tiled kitchen, your brain recognizes a sudden dramatic shift in the environmental statistics.
Wait, I want to pause on that phrase, environmental statistics.
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
that sounds like a math equation, but we are talking about walking into a kitchen. What is the brain actually calculating there?
Well, it is calculating geometry and sensory input. The brain is noting that the lighting has completely changed.
Okay, that makes sense.
The spatial layout and dimensions of the room have changed. The potential tools and hazards like knives or a hot stove are completely different from the soft couch you were just sitting on.
Oh, I see.
And this is actually where the research from University College London comes into play. Researchers there study how the hippocampus maps physical spaces.
And the hippocampus is the part of the brain responsible for spatial memory, right?
Exactly. They found that the brain literally contains boundary cells and grid cells. When you pass through a physical doorway, these cells recognize the architectural boundary and force the hippocampus to remap the new environment.
So the doorway is a literal trigger for the brain to say, okay, scene change, wrap it up.
That's it exactly. The brain actively closes the file in the previous room. It flushes your short-term working memory cache to prep a blank cognitive slate for the new locale.
Wow. So it just wipes the slate clean.
Right. It is proactively making room for whatever you might need to process in this new space. The intention you had, like grab the charger, was filed away and sealed in the living room event model.
So I didn't bring it through the door with me.
Nope. Because your brain assumed it was only relevant to the old environment?
So it's exactly like how a video game handles memory.
Yes, that's a great way to put it.
Like if you were playing a massive open world game, the console cannot render the entire planet at once. It would completely crash the system's RAM.
Whoa.
So when your character walks out of a dark dungeon and into a new sunny forest zone, the game actively unloads the previous level's textures and data to prevent lag.
Right, to render the new environment smoothly. Our brains are basically just aggressively optimizing our biological RAM.
That's so cool.
And the behavioral evidence for this biological RAM clearing is fascinating. Back in 2011, Gabriel Radvansky at Notre Dame wanted to prove that it was the doorway itself causing the forgetting.
Rather than just like the passage of time.
Right, or the physical distance walked.
But how do you even isolate a doorway in an experiment without the participants realizing you are testing their memory of the room?
They set up incredibly clever studies using both virtual reality and physical real-world environments. They had participants navigate these spaces while carrying colored objects.
Like what kind of objects?
Like a red cone or a blue disc, moving them from one table to another. But to make sure the participants were actually relying on their memory and not just looking at their hands, they had to hide the objects.
Oh, sneaky.
Yeah, they hid them inside virtual or physical boxes while they walked.
And the results of this are what put the doorway effect on the map, right?
Exactly.
Because they found that if a participant walked, say, 20 feet across one single giant room, their memory of what was in the box stayed perfectly intact.
Yes.
But if they walked the exact same distance of 20 feet, and that path happened to take them through a doorway into a new room, their memory of the object dropped off a cliff.
Yes. The physical distance wasn't the variable. The time elapsed wasn't the variable. The architectural boundary itself was the trigger for the memory wipe.
That is wild.
And what's crucial to understand for anyone listening today is that this boundary effect isn't limited to physical architecture.
What do you mean?
Well, there is a massive parallel phenomenon known as the digital doorway effect.
Oh, I experience this constantly. It's when you open your phone to check an important email, but before the app loads, you swipe over to a different app or open a new browser tab.
Yep.
Suddenly, you are staring at a blank search bar with absolutely no idea what you originally picked up the phone to do.
It is the exact same mechanism. Minimizing an app or switching tabs acts as a virtual boundary. It tells your predictive processing system that the context has changed.
Which triggers the exact same cognitive event boundary.
Right. Your working memory is flushed to prepare for whatever new information might be on that new tab.
Okay, but this raises a huge practical question.
Let's hear it.
If I walk into the bedroom and my biological RAM clears, why can't I just walk back into the living room to retrieve the memory?
Yeah.
Like if I return to the living room, shouldn't that original file just open right back up?
What's fascinating here is that the research shows returning to the original context rarely works the way we want it to.
Really? Why not?
Remember event segmentation theory. Once you cross that initial doorway into the bedroom, the act of segmenting the event finalized that mental chapter.
Okay.
It bundled it up and stored it away in long-term memory.
So it's basically zipped up in an archive folder now.
Correct. When you walk back into the living room, you aren't reopening the old file. Your brain is simply creating a brand new event model called re-entering the living room.
Oh, man. So the previous context, along with my original intention to grab the charger, is locked behind that earlier boundary.
Exactly. It makes it incredibly hard to retrieve on demand, which is exactly why people end up standing in the hallway feeling completely lost.
And since just moonwalking back through the door doesn't magically restore the lost thought, this is exactly the moment people begin to panic.
They really do.
You stand there thinking, my internal hard drive is failing. It is so common for people to jump straight to assuming they're experiencing early cognitive decline or some kind of memory disorder.
It's very scary in the moment.
So let's completely dismantle that brain anxiety right now. If you experience the doorway effect, you are in excellent company. This happens to peak performance CEOs, it happens to medical students, it happens to people who compete in memory championships.
It really is a universal human experience. And to definitively prove that it isn't related to cognitive decline, we can look at a 2015 follow-up study by Radvansky.
Okay, what did that one show?
They wanted to see if age exacerbated the effect. So they ran the exact same doorway experiments, but this time they compared a group of younger adults, college students in their 20s, with a group of older adults ranging from 65 to 80 years old.
And if this was a sign of memory deterioration, you would expect the older group to struggle significantly more with the doorways.
Exactly. But they didn't.
Wow.
The magnitude of the doorway effect was virtually identical across both age groups. The cognitive wipe was just as severe for the 20-year-olds as it was for the 70-year-olds.
So it has absolutely nothing to do with aging and has nothing to do with a failing memory.
Not at all.
Yeah.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the evolutionary biology behind this is incredibly elegant. We have to take you back to our cave-dwelling ancestors to really appreciate why our brains are hardwired this way.
Okay, take us back to the cave.
Imagine early humans surviving in a highly unpredictable, dangerous environment. Leaving the familiar safety of a dark, enclosed cave and crossing a threshold into a bright, open clearing meant a sudden, radical shift in environmental hazards.
Right, because the things you need to pay attention to in a cave like, I don't know, not tripping over a rock or keeping the fire going, are entirely different from the things you need to pay attention to in a clearing.
Exactly. Out there, a predator or a rival tribe might be waiting.
That makes total sense.
And maintaining an internal train of thought requires a massive amount of metabolic energy and attention. If an early human walked into that clearing while still intensely daydreaming about a smooth rock they were carving back in the cave, they wouldn't survive long.
No, they would get eaten.
Right. Their attention would be internally focused rather than externally vigilant. They needed a built-in focus reset button.
So over thousands of years, the brain adapted to use spatial thresholds as an automatic trigger to instantly drop internal musings.
Yes. It forces the conscious mind to prioritize scanning the new external reality for immediate threats and opportunities.
Here's where it gets really interesting. So it's not that my brain's hard drive is failing or getting old. It's that my evolutionary antivirus software is just hyper-aggressive.
That is a perfect analogy. Yeah,
That's doing exactly what it was designed to do to keep me alive.
exactly. The friction simply comes from the fact that in the modern world, we have far fewer saber-toothed tigers lurking in the bedroom.
Yeah, I hope so.
And we have way more phone chargers, coffee mugs, and chapstick to keep track of. It is an ancient survival mechanism misfiring in a relatively safe, modern environment.
But wait, is it literally the wood frame of the door causing this?
What?
What if you walk into a room that looks exactly the same as the one you just left?
Oh, that's a good question.
Does the brain still think you are walking into a dangerous clearing?
That is a brilliant distinction, and it leads directly into the 2021 study by Jessica McFadden and her team at the University of Queensland.
Oh, right.
They wanted to know if a doorframe is just a magical cognitive tripwire. So they designed an experiment using virtual reality where the adjacent rooms were visually identical to each other.
Like same wallpaper, same lighting, same spatial layout.
Exactly the same.
And what happened? Did the antivirus software still trigger?
When the rooms were identical, the doorway effect almost entirely disappeared.
Wait, really?
Yeah. The participants walked through the doorway, but they didn't forget what they were carrying. This proved that the brain is relying on a distinct sensory shift in the environment, those environmental statistics we talked about earlier, to decide whether to trigger the reset.
So if the environment doesn't change, the brain decides it's still in the same chapter of the event model.
Exactly.
But there was a twist in that Queensland study, wasn't there? They figured out how to bring the memory wipe back, even in identical rooms.
They did. They found they could trigger the doorway effect in identical rooms if they introduced one highly relatable variable.
Which is?
Working memory load. Meaning, if they made the participants multitask-like, asking them to count backwards while walking through the door, the memory wipe struck hard, even without a change in scenery.
Which completely explains modern life.
Oh, totally.
When your working memory is overloaded, like when you were listening to a deep dive, worrying about an email from your boss, and trying to remember to grab your keys, Your cognitive bandwidth is stretched to its absolute breaking point.
Yes, and in that vulnerable state, even the minor physical transition of crossing a threshold is enough to tip the scales.
And cause your brain to drop the least immediately relevant piece of information.
It is the multitasking multiplier. If your brain's processing power is mostly tied up in background tasks, it has very little RAM left to bridge the gap across an event boundary.
Okay, so now that we know our brains aren't broken, but rather operating on a primal survival setting that gets exacerbated by modern multitasking, we need to know how to live with it.
Yeah.
If we can't uninstall this evolutionary software, how do we outsmart it? We want to give you a brain hack blueprint. Based on the cognitive science, we have 3 actionable strategies you can use today to whitelist a task and bypass the memory wipe.
Yes. The first strategy relies on something cognitive psychologists call verbal reinforcement.
Okay.
It involves leveraging a specific neural pathway known as the phonological loop.
Okay, let's unpack the phonological loop. Why does talking out loud survive the doorway when a silent thought gets wiped?
It comes down to how the brain routes different types of information. As we discussed with the University College London research, spatial navigation and environmental context are heavily processed in the hippocampus.
Right.
When you cross a boundary, the hippocampus resets. But the phonological loop, which handles auditory memory and speech, is processed in entirely different areas of the brain, primarily involving the auditory cortex and Broca's area.
So they are running on 2 completely different neural servers.
Precisely. By vocalizing your task, literally saying out loud, "I am going to get my charger," before you stand up, you are forcing your brain to encode the memory using auditory processing rather than just spatial processing.
Wow.
Because those auditory neural pathways run parallel to the spatial ones, they are highly resistant to visual spatial context resets.
So even when the spatial cache clears at the doorway, the auditory memory trace survives the boundary crossing.
Exactly.
That is incredibly practical. It's like saving a crucial document in 2 entirely different file formats just in case the main hard drive crashes.
That's exactly what it's like. And our second strategy builds on a similar concept. It's called visual and tactile anchoring.
Visual and tactile anchoring, how does that work?
This means intentionally carrying a random physical object with you when you move between rooms. If you need to go into the kitchen to check the oven, grab a pen or fidget spinner off your desk and hold it in your hand while you walk.
And why does holding a pen help me remember the oven?
Because this strategy utilizes your somatosensory cortex, the part of the brain that processes touch. By actively holding an object, you are grounding your abstract intention in physical sensation.
Okay.
Your brain is receiving continuous, real-time sensory feedback from your hand. That tactile data acts as a physical bridge across the event boundary. Your spatial memory might wipe, but your tactile memory keeps pinging your conscious mind.
Reminding it that you are in the middle of an active task.
Precisely.
And if you are at work and, you don't want to carry a random object down the hall, the researchers note you can achieve a similar effect through mental simulation.
Yes, that works too.
Like, before you cross the threshold, pause and mentally visualize the physical act of picking up the target item. Picture the stark white color of the charger. Imagine the rubbery feeling of the cord in your hand.
Right. This pre-planning solidifies the memory in multiple sensory formats before the boundary hits.
But I do have to push back playfully here. Doesn't muttering charger, charger, charger to yourself while death gripping a random fidget spinner make you look, well, completely lost your marbles to anyone else in the house?
Well, yeah. I will concede that it might look a bit eccentric to an observer.
Just a little bit.
But you have to weigh the alternatives. What is worse, looking slightly intense for 5 seconds while you walk down the hall? Or wandering your house like a forgetful ghost, opening and closing the refrigerator door in total, bewildered silence because your brain wiped your intentions?
Fair point. I will definitely take looking silly any day over the refrigerator stare.
Same here.
And that leads to our third strategy, which is ruthless single tasking combined with visual cues. We'll call it the pink post-it trick.
I love this one.
Since we know from the Queensland study that multitasking makes the doorway effect infinitely worse, the first rule is simple. Do not check your phone while crossing a room. Just walk.
Right. Your working memory needs all the bandwidth it can get to survive the threshold.
And for those habitual blind spots, like constantly walking into the pantry and forgetting to grab the dog food visual cues, are incredibly effective.
Putting a bright pink post-it note right on the door frame works wonders because it interrupts the automaticity of the transition.
It essentially jolts your predictive processing system right at the moment of highest vulnerability.
Yes.
You see the neon pink, and it re-injects the target intention into your working memory right as the spatial cache is trying to clear.
Exactly. You are artificially manipulating the environmental statistics to remind you of your goal.
So what does this all mean? It means we have to actively build cognitive bridges across the physical boundaries our brains naturally create.
That's a great summary.
We can't stop the subconscious mind from segmenting our lives into chapters, but we can intentionally carry bookmarks with us when we turn the page.
This raises an important question, and it is a concept that expands everything we've talked about far beyond the architecture of your house.
Oh, where else does this apply?
We spent this time talking about physical doors and digital browser tabs, but cognitive psychologists note that this exact same cognitive pattern applies to large-scale macro life changes.
What do you mean by macro life changes, like moving to a new house?
Moving to a new city, graduating from college, ending a long-term relationship, or shifting into a completely new career.
Right.
Neurologically speaking, these function as massive structural event boundaries in the narrative of your life.
Oh, wow. So the doorway effect actually scales up. It isn't just about physical thresholds, it's about temporal and situational thresholds, too.
Exactly. This is precisely why major life transitions feel so profoundly disorienting.
Mm.
When you cross a massive threshold, like a cross-country move or starting a new job, your brain executes a macro-level reset.
Because the environmental statistics of your entire life have changed.
Right. So your brain archives the previous chapter. This is exactly why aspects of your past self, your old daily routines, or the nuanced feelings of your previous circumstances suddenly feel so incredibly distant, archived, and hard to access.
That completely reframes how I look at moving on or starting a new phase of life.
Yeah, it really does.
We often judge ourselves for feeling disconnected from our past, thinking it's purely emotional distance. But what you are saying is that it's actually a structural cognitive reset.
It really is.
Yeah.
It's a factory reset playing out over the span of a lifetime.
Yeah.
It is the doorway effect on a grand scale.
It is the brain's way of forcing you to let go of the old environment so you can dedicate all of your cognitive resources to surviving and thriving in the new one.
Beautifully said.
That is a profound thought to end on. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive today. We really hope you walk away with a little more grace for yourself and an understanding of the incredible mechanics running quietly in the background of your mind.
Absolutely.
Remember to be kind to your brain the next time you stride purposefully into a room, cross the threshold, and draw a total embarrassing blank. Your brain isn't broken and your memory isn't fading. It's just aggressively cleaning house to keep you sharp and ready for whatever comes next. Until next time, keep exploring and maybe grab a post-it note for that tricky doorway. Goodbye.